Well, it really is a delight to be here. You are an impressive group. I hope you know that. And you're an impressive group for impressive reasons. And so it's really an honor to link arms with you over the last 2 days. Some of you I've met. It's unfortunate I'm not going to have a chance to meet all of you, as I would have loved to have done that. And I hope my remarks today can be validating and encouraging for those of you who are already striving to live lives of virtue and avoiding pornography. But I also hope, statistically speaking, in the work that I do, I know it's very likely that there are those here in this room who may be struggling with pornography use themselves or in a relationship and really questioning if that's something they can get out of or not. And so I hope that this can be motivating and encouraging for you and everyone on that spectrum. I'm glad you're here. There are inherent challenges that I'm sure you can appreciate being part of the Love and Fidelity Network of speaking on a topic like pornography. For instance, there's the challenge of speaking clearly and frankly on something that has a high risk of causing offense, but also speaking as a clinician can be triggering for those, especially someone dealing with addiction or someone that's been recently betrayed by a problem like this. There's also the challenge of speaking openly about something that almost everybody has strong beliefs about, right? Including strongly held religious beliefs and political views. I run into that a lot. And I liken pornography as a topic to abortion or capital punishment. But one of the biggest differences with those topics that tend to be very emotionally charged and politically charged for good reasons is that pornography, I find, is far more pervasive. Would you agree? It impacts a far wider net of individuals, males and females. And so with these challenges, there's 3 important things that I want you to know about me before I begin my remarks today. The first is that I go to great lengths to ensure that my presentations and writings are psychologically safe. Again, I'm a therapist. This is really important for me to be able to do that, to ensure that what I share is not graphic or offensive or triggering in any way. That doesn't mean that it cannot be intellectually challenging. I hope that it will challenge and have you question some things, but I don't want it to be psychologically doing harm. My husband, who I need to give a call out to, shout out here to today, because it is only because of him that I'm able to come to events like this with 2 young small children in my life, and so I'm grateful for him. But he's a family physician, very, very busy physician, and I know if he sits in the front lines of the opioid epidemic every single day with a wide range of patients. And I know if he were here speaking about opioids and some of his strong views about that medically, I think he would agree that it would be grossly unethical and even negligent of him if he were passing out samples of opioid pills, right, to the audience as part of proving the point as to how harmful or addictive they can be. Likewise, with pornography, I really do work very hard to protect an audience from that content. So there's nothing in my presentation today that will be graphic in language or imagery. Secondly, I was single when I started this work. I was single when I started working as a marriage and family therapist, and that's a disconnect for a lot of people. It wasn't for me. It was really a love and passion of mine academically and socially. But I want you to know on this topic that I see this through the lens from not too long ago in my life of navigating the social scene, the dating scene, courtship, all of that as a single person. And I will share with you there were some humorous and not so humorous moments in that. I remember going on dates with what I thought were very eligible young bachelors and men that I was interested in. And my mom would coach me extensively, Jill, do not talk about your dissertation topic on a first date. Because this is what I was studying. She said, you're never going to get married if you talk about this on a first date. So sure enough, a young man would say, so Jill, what are you studying? What's your dissertation topic? And on 2 different occasions, I remember saying, I had nothing to hide. I was living and breathing this stuff. And saying, well, I'm studying the impact of pornography on marriages and families. And one young man went red as a tomato, Like all the blood went to his face. It was very awkward. And in my gut, I knew that this was a young man who was either struggling with this himself or just had such discomfort with this topic. Conversely, a few months later, same dinner scenario, and someone said, "Jill, what are you studying?" And so I really tried to kind of downplay this, really get porn light, right, on this topic. And again, all the blood just like left the top part of his body. So when I met my now husband, who was a physician at the time, when I told him, it was really a sign to me that that is amazing. Tell me more about that, right? And there was no discomfort with it. So I remember all too well is the point of those stories, of what it's like to navigate the dating and social scene with pornography being so prevalent, and with many of you being on campuses. Would you agree that are very pro-pornography? Would you say, generally speaking, that's the climate that you are in? So today I want to really arm you with some good information, some research-based information, and information from the trenches of the human condition. I sit with people every day in my office who are struggling with these very, very topics. The third thing that I want you to know about me before we jump into my remarks is that I am a German-born Canadian citizen who was raised in a military family. I love the United States of America, but I do not vote in this country. I'm not aligned with any political party, and my views on pornography have been formed through research that I've conducted myself, or I've spent years literally combing through the data that is available. And as an undergraduate student, I want you to know, because at a similar age that you are at today, I was indifferent to this issue. I was complacent, and I readily admit I had many misconceptions about those who use pornography and what pornography was and wasn't. And so it wasn't until I became a marriage and family therapist and was really working in the trenches with real people and real situations and struggles that it informed my position today. It was in working with children as young as 5, elderly as old as 84, people who were very pro-pornography, people who were proud of working in the industry and being in porn, through a wide range of complex and diverse conversations with real people. My position slowly formed, and I want you to know right off the bat what my position is. Because I've moved from indifference to complacency to an undeniable feeling of urgency that even takes me by surprise some days. And that position is that I believe, through all of that experience, that pornography consumption is a mood-altering, belief-changing, relationship-damaging, addiction-forming, socially harmful, spiritually deadening, and life-crippling practice. It's not just a habit or a behavior. It becomes a way of being and looking at the world around them. And I do not believe that it can be engaged in responsibly or without risk to oneself or others. That risk may not be immediate, but it's somewhere down that line of consumption, there are risks. I had a young college student from out east. I'm based in Denver, just outside of Boulder, Colorado. And I had a young man email me, a very sincere question. He said, "Jill, I totally disagree with you saying that pornography cannot be used responsibly." And I said, "What? Tell me more about this," because I encounter that position quite a bit. And he said, "Well, I make my own pornography. My girlfriend and I, we film our own pornography." And he was convinced that was the way to do this responsibly. So I started asking questions. Do you have any children? Have you ever heard of revenge porn? Are you sure that this relationship and who owns this porn will always stay in your ownership and that will always be secure? And quickly, it doesn't take many questions for that thinking to break down pretty quickly, and for him to even acknowledge in this conversation that it was not as secure and not as responsibly and safe as he had assumed it was. My key message that I want to impart today, if nothing else, is that living a life free of pornography's influence and a virtuous life is possible, is doable, is rewarding, and is a healthier path and a more satisfying path, including sexually more satisfying path for individuals, couples, and families. But how do we accomplish this in a culture that's increasingly sexually toxic, inundated with sexual messages wherever you go, even to young children that I'm seeing now as a mother of 2 young girls? How do we do this? Well, I want to start with a discussion by pulling your mind back to a 1939 classic film, The Wizard of Oz. Now, I'm sure, given how high-tech many of you will be in the room, you will notice right away, this is a fuzzy image. It's not high definition. And I want to use that to highlight a point about the pornography industry. This movie was produced and released shortly before Playboy was published in the United States. It's been decades since this movie has been out and in fact influenced our cultural discussion and thinking about many things. So has Playboy, and we've had almost 3 decades now of internet pornography on the scene since 1993. I want to just put out this idea that I believe is true. If pornography, internet or otherwise, magazine, print, DVDs, whatever it may be, if it was going to have an overwhelmingly positive effect on human beings, their sexuality, their relationships, would you agree that after decades, we should be able to see those positive effects by now? That if this was a social experiment, several decades of having this in our cultural life, we should be able to see the positive effects right now if it was going to be a positive effect. Going back to The Wizard of Oz, because there's a point in me bringing this up today. You may recall near the end of this film that Dorothy and her trusted companions are making their way to the palace of the wizard. And after they finally arrive at the wizard's palace, after much adventure and mishap, they encounter inside an impressive facade of pillars and lights and booming voices. As they nervously prepare to ask the all-knowing wizard if he will grant their most fervent wishes, the green curtain gets pulled back by Toto. And the friends see, for the very first time, that the wizard is nothing more than an insecure man struggling to be something he isn't. Despite his pleas, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. But more importantly than seeing the wizard for who he really was at that moment in time, they also saw themselves in a new light at that point. They saw for the first time in this journey that the heart, the courage, the intellect, and the means to get home that they had so diligently pursued had been theirs all along. They did not need the wizard. What they needed was already within them, by nature, who they were. Similarly, pornography's seductive facade, and probably I think the pornography industry has been one of the most successful marketing campaigns of all time, has fooled many into thinking that it is necessary, a necessary form of expression, escape, and education. No one stops to think about how were people educated sexually 200 years ago, 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, before pornography as we now know it was on the scene. Human beings succeeded at doing that. The fact that we were all living and breathing, we were born, is evidence of that. When we pull back the curtain of fantasy and take an honest look at what a growing body of international scientific data from multidisciplinary fields is saying, as well as clinical experiences globally and anecdotal accounts, we realize that the systemic impact of pornography is a significant hindrance to living and loving in wholehearted, authentic ways. A careful examination of pornography's impact also reveals that we too are enough. We do not need pornography. And that's contrary to a lot of the messages that you will receive on college campuses. You need it to understand sexuality. You need it to learn about sexuality. You need it to express sexuality. And I'm calling baloney on all of that. You don't. As pornography has become mainstream, we have forgotten that it is dispensable. Its effects are preventable, and it is an unnecessary expression for human development, sexual maturation, spiritual growth, happiness, and relational success. If anything, pornography is an impediment to these worthy and noble goals. The message that you are enough is an especially important one, I believe, for single adults, because it has been both my experience and observation, especially when I was working as a clinician on a college campus years ago, that if you are single and desire to be in a healthy, long-lasting relationship, not being in one, would you agree, can result in a lot of self-reflected questions that, if you're not careful, can really slip into feeling a sense of inadequacy or a lack of confidence, right? Questions such as, am I attractive? When will I meet someone? Will I ever meet someone? Am I living in the right place, school, or engaged in the right activities to be able to meet someone? What's wrong with me? Why are all my friends engaged or married and I'm not? Will I find love again after divorce or a breakup? Will my wrestle with pornography be a deal breaker for a girlfriend? How do I raise the issue of pornography in a dating relationship without scaring someone away? Is there anyone out there left that's not involved in pornography? I hear that question a lot when I visit campuses, and I'm hearing and really getting a sense that part of the reason why we have one factor of many, I'm not hanging everything on this hook, is that delayed marriages and changes in dating relationships is partly attributed to easily accessible internet pornography that requires nothing of character in terms of relating and interacting with individuals. The list is endless. What are some of the questions that you ask yourself that are along the lines of, am I enough? And are you able to identify which questions help you move forward and grow, and which questions are what we call in therapy depressogenic? They just bring you down and have you ruminating in things that are they just spin you out. We live in a culture that is fueled by messages of scarcity and not having or being enough. Whether it be money, happiness, time, sleep, popularity, beauty, youth, friends, followers on social media, whatever it may be, throw in personal longing and deeply held, righteous and good goals and longings, and it is a recipe very quickly for feeling like we are seriously lacking in some way. One Jungian analyst once referred to shame as the swampland of the soul. The swampland of the soul. And pornography, I have learned over many years, plays on this vulnerability and invites people into swampland with a great deal of expertise, speed, and deception. Hence the reason why dealing with shame is one of the key things we deal with and tackle in the treatment and healing of compulsive sexual behavior. If anything that I say or bring up or that we discuss today evokes any feelings of shame, regret, or guilt, I want you to hold on to a quote of Dr. Brené Brown that I just love, and I really believe this is true. She said, "Vulnerability is the birthplace of innovation, creativity, and change." And so today, as we dive into some of the research and as I share and ask questions of you, I'm hoping that we can create some change today and use vulnerability and use some of the feelings that may be uncomfortable in this subject to create change, to clarify a value, to set a goal, to change our life in some way. There are 4 key things that I want to talk about today. The first is, and all 4 of these, I believe, lay the foundation for a porn-free life and a happier life. The first is awareness and education. Second, clarifying personal values related to this topic. Living with integrity and virtue. And fourth, making benevolent choices. Awareness in education is where I want to focus most of our attention today, because when I ask, the average age of someone seeking treatment for a pornography or sexually compulsive behavior is 38. Because by that time, the house of cards has started to crumble in. They may have a family that they're starting, a career is being impacted by loss of productivity, or maybe even a lost job for having been caught looking at pornography on a work computer or a school computer. I had a student last year who was booted out of a well-reputed school for looking at pornography on a school computer and violating their library policy. So I want to spend time on this because when I talk to people that have really felt the impact of this in very negative, concrete ways, one of the most common things I'll say to them is, what do you wish you could tell your younger self? Or what do you wish you knew when you were in your teens that you didn't know shortly before this house of cards falling? And almost always they'll say something like, I wish my parents had let me know about the risks of pornography use. Or I wish someone at church or at school had let me know the truth about what the data says, how harmful this material can be. So I'm going to emphasize this today in my talk because I believe information is power, and I hope that you will feel empowered not only for yourself, but for your future families. And when you run up against colleagues or friends or roommates that say, oh, porn is cool, there's nothing wrong with it, that whole spiel, I want to arm you with information that's research-based that you can push back on that in effective ways. I want to start with a quote. Several years ago, I was on a panel discussion with a former FBI agent that specialized in obscenity prosecutions. Fascinating man. And he was just on the verge of retirement. And we sat on this panel, and he was right beside me, and he said this quote, "There is no such thing as just a pornography problem." And I'll be honest with you, at the time he said that, I wasn't so sure I believed that. I had to kind of sit with that for a couple of years. And really, as I've gotten more into my clinical practice, I've been a therapist now for 17 years, it's hard to believe. I really do believe that that is true. That anytime there is someone really hooked into that, there's always something else in the mix. Some of the things in the mix: lies and deceits, secrecy, going to great lengths to cover that up, distorted views and beliefs about themselves, the world, women. And I will say something important for the women in the room here. What the research says is that even when women are viewing pornography, they will also be prone to objectifying women. So the women get a double whammy with this. Both men and women are more prone to objectifying women when they're immersed in pornography. Sexual dysfunction. This is something we are not talking enough about on college campuses. Some of the really strong data coming out on that shows that years ago we had maybe under 5% erectile dysfunction in healthy males 18 to 30. A study that was released last year on one of the U.S. Marine bases, and these are some of the healthiest young men we have in the country, right? They pass through rigorous medicals to be in that service. And what they found was up to 28% of healthy young males were experiencing erectile dysfunction. When they controlled for all other factors, the only thing that they could attribute that to was easy access to internet pornography. I also want to, I debated whether or not to share this, and I realize this is small text at the bottom. This was results from a 2016 study that had a really impressive social science sample size. I think you'd agree, almost 9,000 is a very impressive sample size for social science work. And this came out, and what they did was they surveyed partners of sex addicts and porn addicts, and they asked them, what are all the different types, of acting out that you have been faced with or that you have discovered in your relationship? 79% said internet pornography, but what you'll see is it quickly goes down to all the way to bestiality, which is 1.5%. Okay, that's a very rare type of behavior. That's sex with animals. I have what I consider a small practice because I value being home with my young children. So when they're going to school, I see clients, and when they are home on early release days, I'm home. In my small practice, every single one of these behaviors I have dealt with in the last year. Every single one, including bestiality and issues with child pornography. I make about 4 to 5 calls to law enforcement every year for child pornography related issues. And these are men, these are CEOs, these are doctors, these are lawyers. They know, intellectually they know that these things are wrong and illegal, but I think it speaks to the power of this rabbit hole people go down, how distorted the thinking gets and how impulsive and reckless these choices become, and lack of choices soon become, when someone really becomes compulsively or addicted to this content. When I ask addicts that I work with in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, did you ever think you'd get to this place? Not one of them ever says that they would be struggling, thought that they would be struggling with the things they are now. So most of the people that I work with, they're dealing with 3 to 8 of these. It very quickly bounces from pornography to other forms of acting out. It increases the risk of engaging in paid sex, casual sex. And so I show this to highlight that based on really recent research, while most are dealing with internet pornography, having roughly 55% of this sample, almost 9,000 dealing with compulsive masturbation, that's a serious issue. So I want to move into, because of the focus with Love and Fidelity on healthy marriages and relationships, I want to summarize some of the key data on what we know pornography consumption consumed regularly does to marital relationships. We know, and if any of you are interested in this data, the references are cited at the bottom, and there are hundreds of references to support these points. We know that there's decreased sensitivity toward females and increased objectification of females, even objectification of themselves. And this occurs, as I said, both for males and females. Less progressive views of gender roles. This is an interesting dichotomy in the world that we live in, where there's, as we heard this fantastic discussion this morning by Ryan Anderson, we're so supposedly cutting edge and modern and open with gender issues, but yet those we know, time and time again, dozens and dozens of studies show, those that are looking at pornography are going backward. They have less progressive, more sexist views of gender. There's increased risk of becoming aggressive and abusive, and there is more data coming out about domestic violence, where we're seeing more correlation between pornography consumers and domestic violence, including sexual violence in marriages. More than three times more likelihood to commit adultery, 4 times more likely to pay for sex, and they acquire a very mechanical view of sexuality. I know that if I had more time, we could go into this more fully, but I will say, when I did my family therapy training, I was in Canada, and I worked from part of my internship. I was fortunate to be part of the psychiatry family therapy program, and there was a real emphasis on sexuality in that program. We had people fly in from all over Canada to deal with really complex, chronic sexual issues. And I will say, although sex therapy is not my area of expertise, those that I deal with that have been immersed in porn for any length of time, especially if they started as young boys, they are clueless on many aspects of healthy sexual functioning. And it's this disconnect that's hard for them. They really think they know it all, right? They've seen it all, but they're misled. They're really sold a bill of fraudulent goods, because there's things about human sexual response and the body and relationships. And I love what a clergyman said many years ago, is that the problem with porn is not that it shows too much, it shows too little. It doesn't show the natural flow and function of relationships, the ebbs and flows of that, the reality of that, affection, love. It doesn't show that. It shows a very genitalia-focused aspect of sexual relations that even at that is distorted and morphed into something that you rarely see. I was in touch a few years ago with one of the physicians that works at a medical clinic designed specifically for those in the porn industry in LA. When I heard her stories, that is just not normal. The STDs in parts of the body, I didn't even realize you could have STDs. The types of injuries that these people experience, it is not normal. If anyone tells you this is normal, it's not. We also see increased risk of sexual dysfunction and dissatisfaction. Decreased trust in their partner. That's the person using the pornography starts to become very suspicious of the partner not using pornography, but vice versa. The women I work with that have discovered these behaviors that were going on secretly, they don't trust their partners as far as they can throw them. And it's nothing short of tragic to have waited your whole life to meet the man or woman of your dreams and then to not trust them. And we're running polygraph tests on almost all of the clients that I work with. Decreased desire to marry and have children. By a show of hands, how many of you on the college campuses that you are on believe that pornography use is playing a role in delayed dating and marriage formation? By a show of hands. Yeah, we're living it. I mean, we don't need social scientists to say, yes, this is impacting this. You're living it. Increased risk of job loss, diminished spirituality, and number 9, which I skipped, increased risk of separation and divorce. In some communities and some faith communities, this has now become the number 1 reason why couples are divorcing. So let's take those effects, and then on a hopeful note, let's figure out what makes healthy marriages. So if we look at the characteristics of stable, healthy marriages, these are some of the key elements that we see in research. And there's actually not enough research on what makes happy marriages. It tends to be focused on the negative side of it. So we know, generally speaking, a healthy, long-lasting marital relationship is founded upon mutual belief in the institution of marriage, fidelity of body, mind, and heart, mutual respect, trust, intimacy, including sexual relations that strengthen the marital bond, a spiritual foundation and reverence for sacred aspects of life, and an assumption of the permanence of the relationship. Now let's contrast that to a summary of the effects that I just went through. And I hope you'll see they are polar opposites from one another, right? If you look at fidelity, for instance, and yet with regular pornography consumption, we see 3 times more likely to commit adultery and to hire a prostitute. Those don't go together. Trust. Well, if you have decreased trust both ways, you're undercutting one of the key pillars of healthy relationships. If we look at the fundamentals of intimacy, I like to use with many of my clients Wendy Maltz's. She's just a lovely woman. I know her, lovely in every way. She's a certified sex therapist in Oregon, doing really tremendous work. And I will say, often in the sex therapy world and community, there tends to be a pro-pornography tone. Wendy Maltz really stands out. She's been at this work for many, many years, and she's firmly of the belief that pornography is the antithesis of healthy sexual relations. Because the model she uses, which we call the CERTS model, healthy relations are based on consent, which I know we focus quite a bit on college campuses, but we miss the other components of equality. Both people being able to start and stop equally a sexual interaction. Respect, trust, and safety. Emotional, physical, and spiritual safety. So my questions to you are, which of these characteristics do you believe you are strong in? If we think of preparing, because most of you are single, which of those qualities if we think of sexuality not as a performance-based idea, but something that's really founded in healthy human beings in relations and connection and attachment, which of these attributes do you believe you are already strong in? And is there one or two that maybe you could say, hey, that would be something for me to focus on? How do I become a more trustworthy person of integrity that can be trusted in a relationship? When I do, there's really not a week that goes by. I know you're in academia right now. When I'm working in the trenches of therapy world, there's not a week that goes by that CERT's model is not discussed with clients. Because people that are immersed in pornography or their relationship has been compromised by this, we have to start from scratch by even reteaching what is the basis of healthy sexuality. Because would you agree, in pornography, the opposite of all of these is what's shown and promoted and endorsed, right? Consent, who needs consent, right? That's not needed. You can have sex whenever, whoever. It doesn't even have to be an adult, right? We have that teen porn is the third most popular genre being searched for in the country right now, and the United States is one of the largest producers and consumers of child pornography. It's really this anything goes. Pornography undercuts every single one of these attributes, is my punchline with this slide. If we look at romantic love, and it's kind of humorous to me, think of researchers looking at what is romantic love, right? But when they looked at it, there was a study that examined this in relationship to pornography use, and they found 8 key characteristics to what are the attributes of romance. They found investment in the well-being of a partner, respect, admiration, sexual desire, intimacy, commitment, exclusivity, really being focused, having that sense of being exclusive and chosen, and understanding. When they compared this to the pornography research, guess what? All of that was wiped out. It is the antithesis of both healthy sexual relations, but also romance. And when I meet with women every week who have discovered this behavior secretly going on behind their back, it kills it. Let me just say, it kills it. So let's move into clarifying values, because this sounds so simple. I will own that up front. This is a simple idea, the importance of clarifying your values on this topic, but it is so important because the people that I work with week in, week out, we have to go right back to what matters to you. What are the values that you are living? Some possible areas that I recommend young people or young adults clarify before making commitments in relationships are things like pornography. When we have 87% of young men on college campuses and 31% of young women on college campuses regularly consuming pornography, this is an issue that you'll want to ask about. And I encourage young men and young women to ask one another about this. This is not just a male issue. And I want the young men to know that. Ask female dating partners, what's your stance on this? Where do you stand? Are you involved in this? So some of the areas that I think are important to clarify: intimacy, gender roles, bodies, honesty, use of time, money, politics, social responsibility. For those of you that are married here in the room, would you agree these are important things to sift out and have some clarity around where do we stand, because it can just create enormous stress and friction and conflict if we don't have, it doesn't mean that you're trying to marry someone just like you, but that we can have open discussion and awareness, be mindful of where we stand so that we can move forward in unity. So how do we clarify a value? Being a therapist, I love questions by nature. So I want to pose some questions to you. These again are simple, but I think they're important. So choose any value. Let's take pornography today. Or you could just use pornographic media generally, sexually explicit media. What does that mean for you? And why does it mean what it does? In other words, what or who has informed your view about pornography today? If you are sitting here really for that, you think that pornography is helpful or an important thing to have around, what informed that? Where did you get that idea? And how do you want that value to influence your life and your actions? Conversely, what will happen if you find someone that you would like to be in a relationship with and their values very different on this? How will you integrate this value into your life? And how would someone be able to tell that you're living that value? All good questions, I think, to think about. There was a study by Dr. Jason Carroll. Dr. Jason Carroll is one of my favorite researchers right now in this whole subject of pornography. And he did a large sample of young emerging adults, the 18 to 21-year-old group on campuses. There were 8 different campuses, including religious schools, that were sampled for this. It's called the Generation XXX study, if any of you are interested in it. It's an outstanding study. And in that, he highlighted a quote here that I wanted to read aloud. Now, this particular quote focuses on women, but we could equally say something similar about the men. It says, quote, "Pornography should be regarded as much of a value stance or a personal sexual ethic as it is a behavioral pattern. This may be a particularly salient finding for emerging adult women who report higher levels of acceptance of pornography than actual use of pornography. Furthermore, pornography acceptance among young women was a stronger correlate with permissive sexuality, alcohol use, binge drinking, and cigarette smoking than was actual pornography use." Why is this important? What it tells us is that our values and thinking around pornography have a huge impact. And they have an impact on other things that we will value and choose to engage in. The one reason why they highlighted that was that 31% of their sample, and it was at 804 students that they polled. I think it was evenly split male and female. 31% of the females were using pornography, but 49% of them thought that pornography was socially acceptable. That's significant because what that means is that there's been a generational jump where college students your age, generally speaking, are more accepting of pornography today, think that it's okay. Even if they don't use it themselves, they're more accepting of it than their fathers and grandfathers were a generation ago. So we're seeing a generational leap and a gender leap with this, which I believe as a mother will impact families going forward in some really significant ways. So I want to talk about some guidelines for raising this topic in dating relationships. And these are just my personal take as a therapist working in this, so please feel free to adjust this to your own circumstances or views. I encourage that. But I think this is something in today's world that needs to be discussed. After some trust and connection have been made, please don't address this on a first date. It doesn't go over very well. But after you're starting to feel some connection, bring this up. See where one another stand on this and why. Remember that this is one of many value-based discussions. I don't think we ask one another near enough questions. For those that are married in the room, do you think are there questions you wish you had asked your partner when you were dating that you may not have, as you were kind of caught up in the romance and the rush of that? I know there's lists I wish I had asked. That's a whole other presentation. And there's no one right way to bring that up. But I wanted to point you to a resource that I really like called the SA Lifeline Foundation. They have a great website, salifeline.org, and on that they have a lesson outline as well as a brochure for young single adults. And it gives some really great guidelines and ideas for talking about pornography and dating relationships. And so you can download that for free off of their website. Let's talk for a moment about what happens if you're in a relationship and you find out, you either discover it or it's disclosed, that they have a problem with pornography. That's something they're actively using. What do you do? If there is commitment to recovery, okay, assuming that's where my train of thought is going here, please take things very slowly. Whatever you think is slowly, take it even more slowly. Avoid premature compromises or commitments. And consider other mental health issues in the mix. There was a study a number of years ago, and this is ringing completely true with what I see clinically. 2/3 of people struggling with pornography addictions had a mental health issue of some kind. The most common ones that I see are mood disorders. Bipolar is particularly tricky with this issue. They use pornography to bring themselves up. They use pornography to bring themselves down. It's a really nasty cycle. So if someone that you love and care for is in one of these cycles, please consider a mental health illness as part of that equation. It's not just something you're going to will away if there's that in the mix. And we know by the age of 14, the National Institute on Mental Health says that by the age of 14, a quarter of all lifetime mental illness will have surfaced at that point. But by the age of 24, 3/4 of all lifetime instances of mental illness would have started to pop and come to the surface at that point. So at the very age that you're in a culture on campuses that's pro-pornography and it's just everywhere you go, I just want to introduce this idea of there's often an interplay between mental illness and pornography use. Keep developing other areas of the relationship. This is, again, as you're moving slowly. Be clear on who's responsible for what. If you are the person in the relationship not consuming pornography, it is not your job to fix, cure, control, or manage this. And in fact, I'll say to women, if you are really wanting to marry a man, be committed to marrying a man. And don't babysit someone that you're trying to coddle along to get rid of something that's not okay with you in a marriage relationship. Really be clear, this is his, or conversely, this is her issue that she needs to tackle, and watch and see how they respond to that. That doesn't mean that we're not supportive or that we don't care, but we're just really clear on whose role is what in overcoming something like this. Identify what your bottom lines are. If you believe that in your marriage and future family, pornography or compulsive sexual behavior is not something that's okay, stick to that. I'm deeply concerned as I talk to college women that they're really getting lulled into this idea, well, they're all into porn, Jill, so I might as well just choose one that I like. They're not even, in fact, I spoke with a colleague who's a seasoned mental health clinician on a campus out west, and she said, Jill, when the young women come in and they're talking about issues in their dating relationship with pornography, there's no more rage. They're not even upset. It's been so desensitized. It's so common that they're just trying to figure out, well, you know, how could I work with this or live with this? You do not need to live in a relationship with a pornography issue. And you can make that stance now as a single person and be true to that. Be true to that. Insist on solid sobriety, minimum 1 year. People tend to freak out when I say that, but that's based in data. When we look at the relapse rates of those trying to overcome pornography addictions, their highest risk points for relapse are 6 months and 12 months. A couple of weeks is not going to cut it. And use that time, use that engagement period as a laboratory. Is this person going to long-term be devoted to marriage, is how I construct that? Or is this going to be an ongoing cycle? So I always feel on this topic, I also always want to arm people with help. Because I know statistically speaking, there'll be people in this room who are struggling with this. So I called the McCosh Health Center here, spoke with one of the psychiatrists there, impressive man, and he was thrilled that I was going to highlight this here today, because I know we have many Princeton students here. But if this is not your school, there will be a health center on your campus that could help you connect with appropriate help or have an evaluation to rule out anything else that may be going on. Here it's the McCosh Health Center, and the phone number is listed there. You can also, anywhere in the country, go onto the itap.com site, and it gives you a directory of certified sex addiction therapists. I did my homework before coming today and found the New Jersey SA Helpline. That is a 12-step program. You're actually, if you're a Princeton student, you're 20 to 30 minutes away from really good in-person meetings, but they also have remote meetings by phone. SA Lifeline Foundation is one of my favorite 12 steps. That's for both men and women. It's totally free, and you can phone in or Zoom in 4 times a week remotely. The Fortify program, this is exciting. Fortify is through the Fight the New Drug program. It's not treatment, but it is an incredible program to track progress, give people skills, and arm them with information about how to overcome this. It's completely free until the age of 20. It's amazing, all the apps and information, videos, dozens of videos of trained experts and specialists in this that can really arm you with good treatment information. And after the age of 20, it's $39, a one-time fee. That is amazing. So some other points for those that may be struggling: get really, really honest with yourself, rigorously honest with yourself. Deep down, you'll know if this is a problem. And if it is, I want you to know there's excellent help available, and it is worth it. It is worth it. Don't wait to be one of the 60, 70-year-olds that I see every week. And I know some of you think that's so far off. That would never be me. I would sort this out. I'll stop this when I'm a dad. I'll stop this when I get married. That's not what happens. In fact, marriage and parenthood actually exacerbate these issues. It's one of the biggest myths that this stops after marriage. It does not. The stresses of marriage exacerbate this, because very often with pornography issues, there are also attachment and intimacy issues. So if that has not been dealt with, marriage is not your saving grace on overcoming this, and I want to really punctuate that. Develop a daily wellness plan, including fire drills. Those are when you're triggered, what are your specific action steps that you're going to take to get out of that? Keep them in your phone, have people you can call, all of that good stuff. And be accountable to someone who is sober and that can break the secrecy with you. Okay, I know we're quickly running out of time here, so I want to just finish with some short thoughts about integrity, which is really at the heart of part of the focus of this conference. I define integrity, there's 2 quotes that I love. Integrity is choosing your thoughts and actions based on values rather than personal gain. And integrity is telling myself the truth, and honesty is telling the truth to others. What does a life of integrity look like for you? How would you know that you're living a life of integrity? How would you spot that? And what do you do? Think of something that's really, really matters to you, and maybe you've stepped outside of a value. You made a mistake, or you were in one of those complex moments where it may not have been clear what to do or what the right thing was. How do you respond when you step outside of your value set? And how do you respond when someone you're close to steps out of their value set? Who do you consider to be a person of integrity right now in your life, a living person that you consider to be an example of that? And how did you come to that conclusion? And what would integrity as a couple and integrity as a family look like and mean? As we hold those questions, I want to get into some invitations around making benevolent choices, because I think we can be aware and educated about pornography's effects. You're living in campuses where this is coming at you all the time. And I think there's some of the best truths are simple. And one of the ways that we help this up-and-coming generation overcome pornography is to realize how narcissistic and self-absorbed it is. that we need to be committed to making benevolent choices. What I mean by that is that we not only desire to do good and goodwill and have goodwill, but their acts. We choose to act in kind, charitable ways that don't just focus on ourselves. They focus on how our actions and living impact others. This whole idea that someone can masturbate to a computer late at night and think that no one's ever going to find out and it impacts no one is a complete absurd lie. It comes out. And if you look at your values and you look at how you want to be known as either a benevolent person or not, I want you to consider the people that are impacted, because every time you click on a pornographic page, you are voting. You are voting for this international web of exploitation and crime. Right now we have more sex slaves in the world than we ever had slaves during the transatlantic slave trade. Sex trafficking is one of the fastest growing international crimes. And people don't want to think about it. It's gross, it's dark, it's uncomfortable to think about. But when you are involved in pornography, you are supporting that web of crime and exploitation. People that stand for the very things that you're at this conference standing for, I would like to believe would also take a strong stance against exploitation and the commodification of the human body. That's not what human bodies are designed for. When I work with addicts, they tend to have this type of worldview. They get very sucked into what do I want, when do I want it, and no regard for how those actions are rippling out to other people. When we work with people in treatment, it's really that focus of trying to bring in alignment and balance of, yes, a focus on self and well-being is important, but also in the context of others, the world around you, and if you're a person of faith, a higher power or God, and having greater harmony and unity around those, rather than being so dissociated and splintered and having this exaggerated ego. I don't know if anyone will remember, this ad's quite a bit old, but the Nissan Leaf ad, the car ad, do you remember the polar bear commercial? So there was this picture of a polar bear on this dwindling, melting piece of ice. And the polar bear finally gets to shore and decides they're going to travel until they get to the person that purchased this Nissan Leaf car and hugs them, thanks them, with the message that with environmentalism, the choices that we make day to day impact dynamics, process, and beings, creatures that we may never encounter day to day. And I want to finish with a similar idea, that when we are turning away, not clicking, filtering, deciding not to support exploitation and the commodification of human bodies or sexuality, we are making a massive difference in the world by turning away. As you speak up with your friends and colleagues and say, that's not cool, I'm not a part of that, it has a ripple effect, a benevolent effect on helping people rethink something that has typically been so self-absorbed and narcissistic. Who does it hurt? It doesn't hurt anybody. I do disclosures with men. I do disclosures with husbands on 3-4 times a month, and often 2 of the most common websites that they'll disclose using are Backpage and Craigslist. And I don't often mention specific sites that I know are problematic, but I will, because they've become so common. And we know, if you look up in the news, the CEO of Backpage was arrested almost a year ago now for human trafficking. And I can't tell you how many people are going on to Backpage or Craigslist and using services on there. And they're almost always trafficked individuals. So I want to invite you to really think through your values on this issue, where you stand, and specific actions that you can take to either overcome this in your life or protect your life further, to speak out with friends and let them know that pornography is harmful. There's a growing body of impressive data showing this. And I want to leave off with a quote that from one of my favorite religious and corporate leaders, Sherry L. Dew. She said at the World Congress on Families in Amsterdam in 2009, quote, Barbara Bush told a group of U.S. college students, your success as a family, our success as a society, depends not on what happens at the White House, but on what happens at your house. Therefore, our challenge is to understand how to strengthen families. We tend to focus on policies, legislation, and court opinions related to family. But today I invite you to consider that the single most pervasive threat to the stability and future of the family is sexual immorality in all of its forms. Nothing would do more to strengthen families of the world than a resurgence of moral virtue, particularly sexual purity. And I'll close with that. I'll leave my resources up for a moment, but I want to thank you again for allowing me to be here today and just encourage you to live a life that is free of pornography, that's anchored in core values, and that is a springboard for making benevolent choices that can impact the world in positive ways. Thank you.